My wife and I are both in our early 40s. Now we are an ordinary sports couple, watching our cholesterol, bathroom scales, and children who study away from home. Why not? Both members of this marriage, my wife Amy and I, Jackson Fuller, still find life exciting and fulfilling. We go to parties and have many friends. We've always been that couple who stops to smell the roses. We love hiking in the mountains. In the summer, we go water skiing. We just bought a brand new SUV for my wife. I drive a Mustang that my dad bought new and I've built and cared for since I got it as a college graduation gift. I think I've been washing this car since she was a colt. And at this point, perhaps it's worth telling you about my problem. Oh yes, that's a problem. Not something I want to brag about, but I somehow managed to blab it to the wrong people. Maybe. You see, I have trouble getting aroused and maintaining it long enough to damage my wife. They say that this magical blue wonder drug stops working over time, especially if you use it the way I do, like it's a tic-tac. After our wedding, and for the first 16 or 17 years, everything went smoothly. However, over time, I began to notice some age-related changes that I thought needed attention. I realized that I had encountered a problem and decided to seek advice from a specialist. Perhaps it was at this stage that I could have made a mistake, but I think anyone has the right to make a few mistakes in an attempt to correct the situation. I called my pastor. Big mistake. I don't know what I was thinking then. Then there was the old family doctor who had been seeing me since birth. And then I realized that I needed a family doctor who at least gave the impression that he understood my problem. In fact, they don't understand a damn thing. You know those guys and girls who look you straight in the eye and say, "We're making progress," although in reality everything is only getting worse. See, I really am a damn psycho. To give you a little background, after having 2 kids and endless work weeks, our sex life began to go down the drain. You could say she was already ready to descend. It wasn't about my wife. It was about me. We talked and talked until our faces turned blue. Every conversation ended the same way, with screams, tears, and waving of arms. In other words, it led nowhere. No money was not an issue, period. Get it out of your head right now. I'm a financier, and we have more than enough money to live a very comfortable life. Remember when I mentioned the problems with my family jewels? Now, Amy has always been a real trooper when it comes to my troubles in this regard. The first time this happened, she kissed me and said the same phrase that this happens to all men sometimes. The first time I heard this, I quietly thought, how does she know this? Was she exploring other men behind my back? This thought itself made me excited. That's really strange. At least that's what I thought at the time. The second time I started to worry. But when this happened 3 times in a row, I became scared. That's when I went to see the pastor at our church. He told me to pray about it, and if it continued, then it was God's will. What the hell was I even thinking? Seek advice from a preacher about your failures in the bedroom. It's surprising that he didn't offer us separate beds. The next victim on my list was our family doctor. At least he read medical books. He didn't help either. But he sent me to a psychotherapist. She was an elderly woman who had clearly seen the world. I began to think that she had all the answers, but alas, she did not. Although this may not be entirely true, she offered some ideas without saying much. She asked if we were ready to expand our relationship. It wasn't even a question in the usual sense of the word. It was more of a suggestion that was not directly stated. The word that comes to mind is ambiguity. And this witch was damn good at double entendre. The next week, she asked me to bring my wife. Amy took the day off from work and sat on the couch next to me. Again, I don't remember any questions being asked. But there was talk about how there are ways to expand a relationship without completely destroying it. The process should be slow and gradual. The only thing I heard was ka-ching, and that I needed to talk to my wife more. Oh yes, and listen to her too. Night after night, Amy and I talked. Damn, we talked a lot. And it was always about sex, sex, sex. I didn't even talk so much about sex with the guys at work. The worst part was that my problem only got worse. Yeah, that's the problem, I thought. Stop enduring abuse from Baba Yaga and shift the blame to the only person who may have been the reason, my wife. And then one day we went to a corporate event. Amy wore a dress that you would only see in Vegas. Her blonde hair and red, almost neon dress, which barely stayed on her body, were eye-catching. I was proud of my choice of life partner. The speaker was as boring as a doorknob, and I needed to go to the toilet. I headed to the men's room, where everyone was discussing this boring speaker. Hey, since I'm here, why not take a couple of puffs and relax a little? I closed the booth door and began the relaxation process. Having finished, I returned to the hall and saw some idiot sitting in my place and talking to my wife. Their conversation didn't seem particularly exciting until Amy turned back to the stage, and this idiot began to openly peer into her dress. A thought flashed through my head. Hey, buddy, these are my breasts. Only I have the right to stare at them. It was at this point that I realized that I no longer needed the blue pills. There was a whole tree growing in my pants. Blood really knows how to circulate through the body, and I lost my log when a group of 6 musicians came on stage who they thought knew how to play music. Amy and I danced through a few songs. I couldn't stand it for long, and when my strength left me, the prince appeared on the horizon on a broom and invited my wife to dance. When she gave me a questioning look, I simply nodded. By this time, most of the guests had already begun to go home, and I was ready to join them, but Amy had other plans. She clung to this guy as if he was her only salvation on the sinking Titanic. When she buried her face in his neck, the forest in my pants came to life again, and I realized that I urgently needed to go home. It seemed to me that his hands were moving between their bodies, and I could only imagine what he was doing there. I got tired of it, and like the mighty mouse, I rushed to the rescue. Amy resisted for a full nanosecond when she saw the look on my face. She apologized to the idiot, and when I handed her her suitcase-like purse, it was clear that it was time to go home. Later, in the car, with a slight hint of anger, I asked her, "So, did you have a good time?" She replied yes, and then turned to the window. "What about that young idiot who trampled on your feet before you left?" Amy turned and saw my frown. "Are you jealous?" Her smile turned into a malicious, playful grin. "You should have heard what kind of things he wanted to do to me." I would really like to hear this. I stared at the road again. "He said he wanted to get you into bed." "Oh dear, that was just part of his plans." "Well, don't be silent. Tell me what he said." "Are you sure you want to know?" "Amy, are you going to tell me, or should I drop you off on the side of the road and let you walk?" "Darling, I won't have to go far in this dress, and you know it." She looked at me the way she only does when she's desperately trying to help me wake up my friend. She was right. If the wind had caught her dress, God himself would have been able to appreciate how beautiful his creation was. Somehow, imperceptibly, the gas pedal was almost pressed to the floor, and we rushed home to the bed that was waiting for us at the end of the corridor. The next morning, when I walked into the kitchen, Amy was smiling like the Cheshire Cat from the Disney cartoon. Was last night a success, or just a good night for Daddy? Judging by the look on my wife's face, it was a resounding success. "I never thought you were the jealous type," she admitted, pouring me a mug of hot coffee. "I didn't think so either. But, you know, every day I see you going into your testosterone hive that you call work." I answered, "Sometimes I wonder what kind of compliments your legs get and how I would react if I heard them in person." Amy smiled that same smile that always promised something. "If you saw that guy at the gym hovering around your wife every morning, I guarantee you would be horny all the time." "Whoa, wait a minute, my wife. Who's the guy at the gym?" She touched a chord that shouldn't have been touched. "Who is this freak I should know?" 3 minutes later, Amy was digging her nails into my back, and I was bouncing up and down like a rig. And to be honest, I didn't care about the scratches her nails left. The truth is that it was a one-time show. Despite all her efforts and even made-up stories, the second act did not happen. Just to be clear, our lives are simple. Amy and I usually leave home at the same time. She goes to the gym, I go to work. After work, I also go to the gym. My job pays for the subscription, and it would be stupid not to use it. I realized that my problem was beginning to affect my usually cheerful wife. I was so ashamed. I have long accepted that it makes me depressed. But Amy, she's, like I said, a real fighter. One Tuesday morning, after a stressful but fun weekend with friends, Amy seemed a little more nervous than usual. We were relaxing with our company, a group of school friends. We celebrated the birthday of one of our comrades on Amy's boss's yacht. It was a 3-day weekend, so why not? She was able to borrow the keys, and we headed out to sea to eat our fill and then throw it all overboard. Despite our inexperience with boating, we had a great time about 10 miles off the Gulf Coast. Jokes, teasing, flirting, nothing serious. As far as I remember, a few people had a little too much, but that's all. After all, we are the same kids who still hang out in the same area where we grew up. School and university friends who work and raise children within 10 miles of the hospital where they were born. On Saturday evening, before returning to the real world, the atmosphere was reminiscent of a camping trip, like when I was a child. Lots of stories, a lot of gas jokes, and a revelation or two. But nothing that would seem like a problem. At least to me, a person with my own problems, everything seemed quite normal. Late Sunday evening, we moored at the pier, and like true friends, Amy and I stayed to clean up the yacht for her boss. We spent the night on the boat, and when it was time to go to bed, we were both too tired to think about anything other than rest. And then the same thing came Tuesday morning. I felt a slight tension in the air. It didn't come from me, but I couldn't help but notice it. Maybe it was something in her words, maybe a look, or even something in the food I ate the night before. I don't claim to have psychic abilities, but this feeling was wrong. I asked Amy if everything was okay, but she assured me that everything was fine. Well, what is that even supposed to mean? You have a knot in your stomach that tells you something is wrong, but your wife says she'll be late for the gym and you're late for work. But she was wrong about the gym and my job, although that didn't ease the knot in my stomach. If only she had just been honest with me. Although, maybe she was honest. Maybe I was just seeing signals that weren't really there. But it still felt like I was standing outside a brothel penniless. There was no kiss goodbye, just something like a kiss blown at me from behind the garage door, and the knot became even tighter. There was nothing I could do about it except get in the car and go to work. I could see Amy's SUV in the rearview mirror as it slowly rolled down the street, but the red light stopped me. At this time of day, I usually considered this light more of a suggestion than a strict rule. But noticing a police car nearby, I decided to stop. When the light turned green, I looked in the rearview mirror and didn't see Amy's car. Instead, I saw a bread truck delivering the morning deliveries. This is interesting, I thought, slowing down at the side of the road to let the truck pass. Where is my wife? There was only one side street between where I was staying and where I last saw her. I wondered if everything was okay. Not wanting to waste time, I turned around and headed back. When I saw her car, there was nowhere to go. The knot in my stomach turned into a ball, the size of a hot air balloon at a hot air balloon festival. I recognized the street. It was the same one along which we drove to the pier to pick up the yacht on Friday evening. Oh, that's it. She must have forgotten something on the boat. Why not? I have time to help her. I headed to the pier where her boss's yacht was moored. There were only 3 cars in the parking lot. I entered the same code as on Friday. The gate clicked and I walked inside. The pier was filled with all kinds of boats. I walked slowly along the pier to make sure I was heading towards the right yacht. I saw light coming from within. As I approached, I thought about what I would say to Amy when I interrupted her to offer my help. But there was no need for this. Going up to the deck, I heard her voice. She was talking to someone. Through the crack between the curtains, I saw that they were not discussing recipes. Most of the conversation concerned me while they were undressing. I heard a man's voice order my beautiful, loving wife to take him into her mouth. and after a couple of seconds I heard her obediently obey. But most of all, her words pierced me. It's so nice to finally feel satisfied and not have to spend half the night trying to excite him. I slowly walked away and returned to my car. If Amy had held a knife to my throat, she could not have cut me as deeply as her words did. That day, to put it mildly, was one of the longest days of my life. I didn't go to lunch. I didn't do anything that I usually do in a day. I just snapped at my assistant when she asked over and over again if I was okay. Now there was no knot in my stomach. All that remained were fragments of crushed, wounded pride and the question, what now? As soon as I entered the house from the garage, I realized that there would be no humiliation, no begging, no throwing of anything or anyone at her feet. No longer will Jackson Fuller live with a shadow of constant pain and suffering hanging over his head. I was going to act like a man and leave. "Ha, you call this acting like a man?" I called her and told her I'd be home early. He said that I didn't feel strong enough to work out today, and she asked, "What happened?" Just like in the morning, I replied that everything was fine, although I knew that it was not so. Once I made my decision, there was no turning back. I loaded my home computer and some work stuff into the car. Now I understand why men like pickup trucks. I was still driving around in my '68 Mustang, which had already been restored and repainted 3 times. But he still looked new. The only problem was that almost nothing could be loaded into it. Also, on a good day, it only leaked half a liter of oil. I loaded the computer and other things without any problems, but there was not enough room for everything else that I really wanted to take with me. My collection of baseball cards took up a lot of space, and then I realized that the collection Playboy will have to leave it. There was only enough room for a few suits and sports equipment. If I need anything else, I'll have to go shopping. It's okay, I've never done this, but someday I have to start. As per schedule, Amy pulled up to the garage. When she walked around the car, she saw the things I had loaded into the Mustang. "What is this?" she asked, pointing at my car. I took a deep breath. I didn't expect her to notice the clothes in the back seat so quickly. I couldn't think of anything better and said, "I saw you give the keys to the boat to your boss this morning." She fell to her knees. "I'll contact you so we can talk. If we try to talk now, you won't like what I say. Let's wait a day or two to think everything over with a cool head." There was no answer, only the sound of her sobs. She didn't say a word. I opened the driver's door, sat in the bucket seat, turned the ignition key, and drove out onto the street. I left. There must have been 100 calls from anyone but Amy. The fact that she didn't call didn't discourage me too much. Rather, it was depressing to think that she could feel free from all the problems that I had, from all the manipulations and games she put me through to drive me crazy. It's possible she just didn't want to deal with it anymore. I was sure that she still loved me. But at what cost? Was this love worth what she had to go through? Was the effort worth the result? Even I had to admit that it didn't. However, I admit that the first night without her soothing touch, located just a few centimeters from me, was difficult. But then the tape started playing in my head again and again, recording the sounds of her and her boss on that damn boat. I didn't see what exactly was happening there. I looked through a tiny slit that only gave a partial view of the two of them, but it was the sounds and words that tormented my consciousness. And then this eternal question arose about my love for her. Can she survive the realization of what she felt for someone else? The loss of her love, the loss of her trust. But most of all, can I survive the loss of her? Was she asking herself the same questions that tormented me? Perhaps she had already given up, knowing what I saw. It's going to be hellishly hard to go through. And this is just the beginning, I thought out loud. I was right. It was almost impossible to fall asleep that night. He tossed and turned, sweated, and had dreams. Amy, naked, in the arms of not just one man, but an endless series of men. Each next one is more beautiful and better than the previous one. Waking up in horror from this nightmare, I sat up on the bed. I was excited. This was no ordinary excitement. It hurt. I sat and looked at this traitor in my hand. I didn't know whether to be proud of him or cut him off to hell and die from loss of blood. I chose the former and tried to ease the pain. When it was all over, I knew the answer was out there somewhere. You just need to find it. The next day I came to the office and told my assistant this whole ugly story. If there was a person in the world whom I trusted more than Sylvia Thompson, I did not know about him. She was my right hand, my confessor. First of all, she was my friend. When her own marriage failed, she was the first to come to me. I was next to her the whole time. Like a true friend, she listened to me with compassion and an open heart. She allowed me to let out all the pain. Finally, she took my hand and offered to help. Then I realized that there was still a lot of work ahead of me before I could let go of what was once full of love for so many years. Phone calls were the main activity of the day. I called the kids on a conference call. I woke up my son. Neither of them spoke to my mother, and I had to tell them that I no longer lived at home. When the time came to tell them the details, I mentally thanked my wife. She will be the one to answer all their questions. All I had to say was, ask your mom. It wasn't until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon that my assistant told me that my wife was on the line. What the hell? Jackson, Amy screamed into the phone before I could say, so, what's up? I didn't say that, of course, but that would be the ideal answer. I just talked to our daughter, and she asked why you don't live at home anymore. And what did you tell her? I admit, a slight grin appeared on my face. That stupid smile hid a deeper feeling of pain and regret. Amy couldn't see my face, but this feeling gave me the illusion of control. My army was on high ground, facing the enemy. God, I thought, is she really my enemy? I told her the truth, she replied. There was a pause in the conversation. My smug mind began to work feverishly. Did you tell her your truth or mine? What's the difference? Huge, I said loudly. I moved the phone away from my face. My eyes darted around the room. Anger filled me. What did you tell her? There was silence, and then she said, I hear you're still angry. Why don't we wait until we can all meet? Okay, but only if both children are there. I know what my problem is, and I admit that it is my fault. But we need to discuss what role you played in this mess. What role did I play? Don't you dare put all this on me. She was rightly indignant at the tone of my accusations, but I would never admit it to her. At least not now. What time and where? She asked, and I heard irritation in her voice. The kids won't be able to arrive until noon on Saturday, so let's order food and deal with all our demons at once, I suggested. Okay, she answered sharply and hung up. I don't mean to imply that my wife is a dog when I say she barked. She's not like that at all. I used that word because her response was so abrupt that I felt like I was starting to lose my hearing. When I thought about our meeting on Saturday, it became clear to me that this day would have to be forgotten. After work, I went to the gym. I threw out all my anger on every free exercise machine. I tried to break everything. When I left in the evening, the only thing that was broken was myself. When I returned to my room, by the way, I really should find a more comfortable place. I ordered pizza, a warm soda, and some rolls that were cold and hard as a rock. For the second night in a row, my body resisted sleep. I began to understand, or rather, a thought flashed. I could soon become a bachelor again. What will this mean for me? What will I do with my newfound freedom? Dealing with the thought of divorce or separation. Wait a minute, I thought. Why would I go through this crap again? Nothing will change. I will remain the same person, and Amy will have to find solace somewhere else, in the arms of another man. But this is already something. Just thinking about the situation, I continued to think. I would just remain single. When the question of intimate life arises, well, I'll figure it out myself. Amy could have moved on with her life. She deserves a full and vibrant life. She just can't get it with me. Damn it, I thought of it myself. After this breakthrough, I don't even remember how my head touched the pillow. But in the middle of the night, I was visited again by the ghost of the saint. Am I still here, buddy? I woke up around the same time and with the same problem as the day before. My right hand had more fun than it had in years. In fact, it was even more enjoyable than last night. Sleep again, and this time the dreams did not return. Ah, a relaxing holiday. Thursday was an ordinary day. My assistant asked if I was feeling better, and I happily gave him a thumbs up. Oh yes, Saturday's meeting promised to be a disaster from the very beginning. Amy will make me out to be the villain, and I'll have to sit there and take it like a man. Oh well, let's get this over with. One of my colleagues was in the elevator leaving the office with me. He and I have been friends for a long time. You missed out on a lot by not going to the boat party last weekend, I said. He gave me a mysterious look. My wife thought we shouldn't go because of your situation. Not understanding what he was talking about, I asked, "What other situation?" "Well, your situation with your wife." "No, I don't know. What do you mean by my situation with my wife?" He couldn't help but notice how my brows furrowed and my eyes narrowed with questions demanding an answer. "Just forget I said anything. John, his name is John Fenton. You just made a statement about my wife and me. I think you can at least explain what you meant." The elevator opened and John followed me out. "Are you going to the gym?" I shook my head, making it clear that the gym was not part of my plans. The thoughts were more about finding bigger housing. "Great, then let's not go, but let's say that we went." He grabbed me by the elbow and led me to the large doors at the exit of the building. As we moved away from the people coming and going from the building, he looked at me with deep concern on his face. "You really don't know anything, do you?" My patience was quickly running out. "John, stop being a fool. What don't I know? This is not the place for such talk. Meet me at Sonny's bar." The look on his face made it clear that I would not get any answers here and now, so I agreed. When I pulled into the parking lot of Sonny's bar, where we sometimes went, I saw that John had already arrived and was standing next to his car. When we walked into the bar, John put his hand on my back like an old friend. "What can we drink to get you properly drunk?" John shouted loudly to Mac, the bartender, ordered us a beer, and we sat down at the table, looking intently at each other. "Well, John, I'm here. What's the matter?" He looked at me with sympathy. "How many years have we been friends? Come on, John, don't make me beg. What the hell is going on?" The waitress placed 2 large mugs of beer on the table. John paid in cash and said, "When these mugs are empty, bring us more." She smiled and left. Looks like it's true. The husband is the last one to know. He didn't take his eyes off me. I felt my chest become heavy. "Please, John, don't tell me Amy is cheating on me." He took a deep breath. "Sorry, buddy. Your wife has been dating another man for a long time." It became difficult for me to breathe. "How do you know?" He didn't even blink. "Margie told me about this at least 2 years ago. And last week, she said it's still going on. You've known about this for 2 years and are only now telling me. What a friend, there's nothing to say." I started to get up to get away, but John stopped me. "Please, please, Jackson. Everything is more complicated than you think." He paused to make sure I was listening. "You need professional help. Everything is much more complicated than just banal betrayal. I don't know how, but my wife, Margie, said it was all so damn weird. She didn't tell me the details, only that Amy wasn't as sweet and loving as you thought." I didn't know what to think. I got up from the table. This time, John didn't even try to stop me. I got out and headed to my car. He just stood and looked at her. Do I care about my car more than my marriage? Even after opening the door, I continued to stand. Have you ever felt that feeling when you have so many thoughts in your head that none of them make sense? All the way back to my motel room, my emotions swung from rage to tears, from self-blame back to rage. When I got to my room, I didn't eat or drink anything. I just wanted to fall on the bed and turn my mind off of everything that was happening. Easier said than done. At least I didn't dream about anything that night. But there was no rest either. I didn't get out of bed, didn't walk back and forth around the room. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I just lay there and listened to the sounds of the night. There was a fight in the next room. I have been in such situations myself. In the motel parking lot, the police stopped someone for trespassing. I wonder if he is to blame for finding out about his wife's infidelity. I remember feeling relieved when the flashing lights of the patrol car disappeared around the corner. Apparently, the fight in the next room had subsided. Now I heard the head of the bed rhythmically knocking against the wall. There is a strange feeling that comes over you, a feeling that comes from the environment. It is not at all like the soft breeze that your wife's breath creates next to you when she sleeps. Then I remembered that John advised me to seek professional help. There was a very long shower at night. The coffee in the room could be called coffee at a stretch. A vague message on my boss's answering machine made it clear that I wouldn't be at work Thursday morning. The next step was to eat something and then stop by the gym to see if my wife was there. She wasn't there. Then I headed over to Stanley Launstein before he got too busy. Stanley was my college roommate, friend, best man at my wedding, and now my lawyer. I left a message on his answering machine that I would meet him at breakfast if he had a moment to listen to my story. Stanley called back quickly, and within a minute of conversation, he said that he did not have time. But what alarmed me was how he said it. I didn't remind him how I once gave up everything to help him raise money to open his practice. What the hell is going on? I thought. A work friend has been keeping a secret from me for God knows how long. My wife is leading me by the nose. The man I would jump in front of a bullet for turns his back on me, and I wander around like a lemming in search of the sea. Before anything could cloud my mind, I did the only thing I should have done in the first place. I called my personal assistant. This may sound strange, but it was obvious that my friends were not the type who would go out of their way to help me. I needed to write this new information down on a sticky note and stick it in the corner of my mind. Hell, I don't know. Maybe I really am the king of all the assholes in the world, and I'm only now starting to understand it. For my part, I've always considered myself a pretty decent guy, but apparently that's not the case. Sylvia Thompson, my personal assistant, answered the phone on the first ring, and she was ready. Sylvia gave me a list of private investigators and told me who she hired during her divorce. She said she was very pleased with the thoroughness with which the detective collected the information. She also had a list of family law attorneys and could recommend a couple of them. I didn't hesitate. I followed her advice, and by the end of the day, everything was settled. One interesting thing my private investigator said was that I should not attend the meeting with my wife on Saturday. When I asked him, "Why?" he replied that Saturday was too early to start a showdown with his wife. I didn't think that Saturday's meeting would be a showdown. I thought this would be a conversation to explain to the children why I no longer live at home. It had to be a revelation so the kids would understand what the hell was going on. Shrugging my shoulders, I agreed. I took the rest of the week off, which was just one day. I spent the entire Friday looking for permanent housing. There was one beautiful and quiet place with a lot of greenery and trees, but there were too many older people with gray hair that just didn't fit into my plans. Not that I could do anything about it, but it was a definite no as a new home. For me. I found a mature condominium with a pool, tall bushes, but few trees, judging by the number of bikinis by the pool. Let's just say I was quite happy that I would have to climb the stairs to the third floor. The gym was not bad. It had more equipment for women, but that was never a problem for me. Of course, I had to wait another week for the apartment to become available, but I eagerly signed the lease. Sorry, but I didn't know where this new me came from. It seemed as if some kind of core had suddenly grown inside me. It was an unusual feeling. Not to say that the bad is just unexpected. And I must admit, I liked it. Saturday arrived, and right on schedule, my phone was literally dancing on the table. I was not where my family expected me. I was lying on the couch, drinking beer and watching a football match on TV. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the images of slender bodies lounging by the pool out of my head. Damn, it didn't take long for the new me to take control of my body. I was faced with almost constant excitement. Where did this come from? Maybe it wasn't me all along. Sunday passed with the phone lying in the nightstand drawer next to the bed with the power turned off. I gathered my few belongings, putting them in relative order, preparing for the big move. I called my assistant Sylvia to thank her for her advice. Of course, I asked her if she was ready to take my place. She just laughed without saying a word. I wondered if I should worry. No, not yet. I didn't work on Monday or Tuesday, but on Wednesday I decided to get back in the saddle. But as soon as I entered the building, my phone rang. When I answered, I was surprised it was a conference call between my lawyer and the detective. The lawyer spoke first. "Jackson, we need to meet urgently." The detective immediately intervened and asked if I was anywhere near my wife. "No, you told me not to meet her on Saturday, so I just sat and did nothing." "Okay," they said in unison. The lawyer then asked me to come to his office immediately. ASAP. I offered a time to meet, but was immediately rejected. "We need to talk now. No excuses." What the hell could be so important, I thought. Regardless, I wasn't going to act stupid and contradict the people I was paying to help me. I called Sylvia and told her I wouldn't be there today. A few minutes later, I was pulling into the gravel parking lot next to my lawyer's office. There were 3 cars parked there and an inconspicuous van with a flat tire. The thought flashed through my head, "Oh, I know how to choose." This related to the condition of the building and surrounding area. To say my confidence was a little shaken would be an understatement. But not allowing myself to doubt, I pushed open the unlocked door and met a man who had clearly never refused a refill. This guy weighed 400 pounds, if not more. Huge, imposing, and incredibly impressive. He shook my hand, and his first words convinced me that I was in good hands, and that the best thing I could do was to turn to them. I was taken to a meeting room where there were about 4 people. My lawyer was easily recognizable, the only person in a suit. But there was another interesting person there, a woman with jet black hair and golden skin, for whom a man would shoot a nun just to be near her. After my new best friend uttered several phrases that left me completely bewildered, the detective took the floor. "Do you know a man named Justin Baines? Does he sometimes use the initials GR or JB?" "Not sure if I had ever met such a person," I replied. "No. Are you sure? After all, you met him. You met him at the last company dinner you and your wife, Amy, attended." Click. So this is the guy who danced with my wife. We have no information about who danced with your wife, but we know for sure that the man you saw on the yacht with Amy is not her boss. It was one GR or JB Baines. One of those present at the table handed me a photograph. It was the same man I saw dancing with Amy at the company dinner. "Is this him?" I was almost happy, but then a realization struck me. This is the same man who took Amy from me. "Where the hell did you get this information?" Remembering that there was a woman at the table, I apologized. "We have our own sources, but in your case, we had to hurry. Your life is in danger." A chill runs through your body when some strong guy says, "Your life is in danger." I stuttered before I could say, "You must be joking. No one can wish me harm. I'm Mr. Good Guy. I make people a ton of money, and they don't even have to do anything for it. Have you looked at your stock portfolio lately?" Gradually, the picture began to become clearer in my head. "I check it every day." The big man grinned. "Baines does the same thing." "This can't be," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "Let's start from the very beginning," the woman interrupted him. "I think it will become clearer to you if we tell you the whole story." In her hand was a stack of papers, neatly separated by colored paper clips. "This will take some time, but you need to understand what kind of whirlpool you are in, okay?" I nodded and prepared to listen. "Your daughter is now starting her 3rd year at Dance College for Girls. Is that right?" She handed me a stack of papers. I didn't even look at them, I just nodded. She continued. "When your daughter was in high school, she was president of the Latin Club. She traveled to Austin for a Latin competition sponsored by the public school system. Your wife accompanied her as an accompanying adult. Yes, I remembered it well. Our daughter took 2nd place in this competition. It was an exciting event, And I remember how proud I was of her when she called me that evening and told me about her success. The female investigator continued. Justin Bain's son also participated in this competition. This was the same boy who took first place ahead of your daughter. That day, or rather that night, your wife realized that Mr. Goodboy was no longer happy with her. My rage began to rise to the surface, but my lawyer grabbed my hand to calm me down. It turns out that your wife and Mr. Baines had quite a pleasant conversation, if you know what I mean. I simply nodded and waited for the next stack of papers to appear in front of me. You should know that once he got her attention, he used illegal substances to bend her to his will. I was stunned. Amy would never allow a man to get close enough to her that he could do anything to her. Remember the situation we're talking about? She said, pausing and handing me another stack of papers. Your wife and this man just saw their children take first and second place in a national competition. They were. At least your wife was happy and wanted to celebrate. Baines simply gave her the opportunity to celebrate. After a couple of drinks, your wife could accept anything from him, and she accepted. How do you know this? I asked. Because you are looking at one of his victims. I know what you are facing. I know how it works. I was in your shoes, only I was in high heels. I don't understand. Looking me straight in the eyes, she said sternly. Your friend, Justin Baines, is a dangerous man. She shook her finger in my face and continued. My husband, with whom I lived for 15 years, would be alive if I didn't fall for his bait. Practically shouting at me, she continued. This man carries around a list of vulnerable women who are married to successful men. If a husband gives his wife a little freedom, he will show up and give her exactly what she wants. Or rather, what he wants her to want. She handed me another package of papers. This time there was a blank piece of paper on top, hiding the photographs. The photographs showed my wife and this Baines having lunch in the hotel restaurant. Then they went up to the room where they spent the rest of the day. In an elevator full of people, his hands were all over her body. While flipping through the photos, I heard. The investigator who was in the elevator overheard Baines telling your wife that everything was ready. They'll be in Brazil before anyone even notices they're gone. Anger overwhelmed me. I jumped up from my chair and, practically shouting, said, Amy would never do this to us. Never. I know her. I collapsed back into the chair, covering my face with my hands and bursting into tears. There was silence in the room until I pulled myself together. When I finally looked up, the last stack of papers lay on the table. The female detective, who still had not introduced herself, asked, Have you ever heard of Randall Sutton? Yes, it was a big banker who was found dead of an overdose in a cheap hotel. I thought for a moment, remembering the story from 6 years ago. The news said he committed suicide because of embezzlement charges or something like that. She looked at me with a cold, stony look. Randall Sutton was my husband. He had never even taken aspirin in his life. I don't understand. The day Baines and I were supposed to leave the country, my appendix burst. Colleagues called an ambulance, and I ended up in the hospital. There it turned out that I was being bullied. After the operation, I was beside myself for several days. I was informed that my husband was found along with a note in which he allegedly admitted to embezzlement. Insurance investigators said the case seemed simple and obvious. They claimed that all the evidence led to my husband's computer. All my objections led to nothing. Nobody wanted to listen to me. The damage was compensated, but I was left with nothing. Everything I had went to pay the insurance company for what my husband allegedly stole. I interrupted her. So you want to say? I want to say that if they take a blood test from you now, they will probably find traces of illegal substances in it. And most likely, your wife gave them to you on Baines' instructions. But the most important thing is your wife. She, unknowingly, is also probably under the influence of Baines and his drugs. She continued. Baines has a degree in pharmacology, but he never used his knowledge for good. He spent more time fooling rich women than doing anything useful. This guy has a genius intellect and the ego of a god. But moral principles? Sorry, he simply doesn't have them. She unfolded the last packet of documents and showed Bain's plans. Once he convinced your wife that he was her knight in shining armor who would take her to the promised land, she became soft clay in his hands. He promised to take her and your children to a place where they would be safe from your supposedly erratic behavior. I jumped out of my chair and shouted, "What other unbalanced behavior? I'm Mr. Goody, remember." The private investigator waved her hands, palms down, motioning for me to sit down so she could finish. Baines filled your wife's head with lies and innuendos that made her really start to fear you. Amy, is she afraid of me? She unfolded the last stack of papers, and inside was a list of things that Baines had used to poison Amy's mind. When I saw this list, I was able to remember her comments and actions, which now seemed completely logical. How do you know this? Remember, Jackson, I said that I was one of his victims. She sat back in her chair and watched as I read the list of events that supported her words. Is there anything else I need to know? I asked. Right now, our people are looking after your wife and children. She paused. When we learned that Baines had only bought one ticket abroad, we knew we had to act quickly. Your accounts are frozen, so your finances are safe, and your wife is being informed by the police right now. As soon as Baines tries to access your accounts, federal agents will intervene and arrest him. What will happen to Amy? I asked. It depends on you. You will have to tell her all the facts and make a decision yourself. Looking around the room, I saw only sad faces, but I understood that I would have to face all the images and lies that my wife had been brainwashed with. Can she see them for who they are and understand who Baines really is? But the biggest question was whether I could get my heart, mind, and love back. I never thought that love and marriage could be so fragile. I left this gloomy building just as the sun was setting. Looking at the horizon, I wondered if tomorrow would be a new day or a repeat of today's pain. I guess I'll only know if I see the sun rise again. When you see your life being destroyed by the person you spent more than half your days on this earth with, loving him unconditionally, and suddenly you find yourself on a one-way street. The word unconditionally becomes just another piece of wood that you throw around, into the fire. Days filled with joy and sadness, days full of fun and intellectual growth. It's hard to understand. Unanswered questions creep into your consciousness every time you see, hear, or feel something that reminds you of the past. For example, I went to a donut shop, which I had never done before. I smelled sugar in the air and burst into tears. The smell reminded me of the fudge Amy has made every Christmas since we got married. I always looked forward to the holidays because of the treats she prepared. I know it sounds strange, but this is what my life has become. Everything reminded me of days or events that brought out another painful memory. In my case, everything was so confusing. My wife, with whom I lived for 20 years, has been cheating on me for the last 2, 3, or 4 years, and I have not noticed anything. Yes, I became agitated less and less often, and then stopped altogether. And I only blamed myself. And then I suddenly realized that I was flying to the bottom of this abyss at the suggestion of my wife and her lover. How do you recover from the pain and loss of everything that makes a marriage a marriage? As I hope you understand, I took it very hard. I can't remember how many times friends or acquaintances have said, "Time heals all wounds." At first you think that divorce will fix everything, and it really helps, but not for long, not for long. Come on, time, get moving. I moved into an adults-only apartment complex. There were several lonely girls there. They seemed to have great fun flaunting their toned bodies by the pool all day long. I could never understand, if you came to the pool to tan, why not just lie in the sun? These girls lay in the sun for 5 or 10 minutes on one side, then rolled over to the other, and then hid in the shade of one of the many bushes, but still remained on their sun loungers. I lie in the sun until I get hot and turn over when I start to overheat on the other side. Then I jump into the water to cool off, grab a cold beer from my room, and go take a nap. Damn, isn't this a fun future ahead of me? My personal assistant at work began to become seriously concerned about my lack of interest in anyone, especially the fairer sex. She tried to get me a date, but it turned out to be a real nightmare for her friend. It's been over 20 years since I last went on a date. I came to her house too early. Seriously, much sooner than necessary. I was stressed to death about the whole date scene. I almost vomited at the thought that I might have to kiss her goodbye. I kissed her anyway. I didn't throw up. I think she wanted a little more than I was willing to offer. But looking back, I think it would have been better if I had never seen her again. Oh no, I'm not a complete idiot. The next day I called her and said all the kind things a gentleman should say to never go through that again. I think it's all because of the memories. She smiled like a woman. She gave off that special aroma that can only be felt next to a woman. She felt like a real woman in my arms as we danced. She even tasted like a woman when I kissed her. But for some reason, it wasn't for me. Amy, my ex, haunted me every minute of that night. It's not fun. Believe me, it's not fun at all. I went from a big cozy house in the suburbs to a tiny motel room and a studio apartment. When federal authorities intervened to kill my wife and her lover, they froze all of my assets. The only funds available were those that were hidden in the vault, and as luck would have it, no one knew what these funds were and where the gold bars in the ounce were hidden. They were bullion, not coins. When I was a child, my grandfather told me stories about how the government took all the gold out of circulation, how they confiscated all the silver and gold certificates and gold coins. I thought it was pretty cool. So when the government announced that the average citizen could buy and store gold, I started saving a little bit of it for a rainy day. When you could buy gold on eBay, I went a little crazy. I bought gold by the gram. If you don't know how many grams of gold it takes to make an ounce, just trust me. It's a lot. But in the end, it was worth it. I know it sounds like I did something behind my wife's back, but I assure you I didn't do that. She got everything she deserved in the divorce, and I got what I wanted: freedom from her life. One afternoon, my assistant and I were relaxing in my office, and for some reason the conversation turned to the problems in our marriages. She knew I had difficulties and was in the same situation herself. She just finished her second divorce. I tried to cope with the pain of the first one. With a serious look, she asked, "Do you know what divorce does to a woman?" "I have no idea, but if it's the same as with a man, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone." With these wise words, I raised my soda in a toast. No, I'm serious. When a woman, faithful as a dog, suddenly discovers that her husband has decided to sharpen his pencil on the side, she becomes furious and throws him out into the street. Now he can sleep with anyone. And a woman, a decent, honest woman, turns into a girl of easy virtue. She raised her glass as a sign of truth. The first time I was an ideal wife. Did all the stupid things a wife should do, and he went and made his neighbor pregnant. She paused for me to answer something. Why didn't he just stay home and get me pregnant? Am I really such a bitch? How the hell should I answer this? She made me think about my life, and then I realized that my life wasn't so bad after all. If life continues like this, fuck it, I wasn't going to hide in a hole. There was too much life ahead of me. No, you are not the bad woman you think you are. You are all that good and even more. We both raised our glasses, and she wiped a tear from her cheek, saying it was time to get back to work. That's when I started to reclaim those hours between work and work. You know, those hours when you look for your wife to tell you to take out the trash. Or those moments when she said things like, "If you don't take out the trash, I'll dump it on your side of the bed. You can sleep in that shit if you like it so much." Oh, those were the good days. No worries, no hassle. Life is good. But this couldn't last forever, so I started leaving the house and seeking female companionship. I have developed certain habits. Monday was a recovery day. After the weekend, all the problems piled up on my desktop. So Monday was the day I recovered from the weekend. Now let's move on to Tuesday. On Tuesday, there is no one on the streets with whom you would like to sleep. It's just an evening to play checkers with the old people at the club. God, this is so Amos and Andy. For those who don't know, Amos and Andy was a radio show, and then a TV show back when Hector was a puppy, right after the discovery of mud. I know about them because my grandfather has all their records. Here comes Wednesday. Wednesday is an interesting evening. This is usually the evening when the girls have a bachelorette party. It's a ritual where like-minded women, usually from the suburbs, gather to show off how horny they are. This happens in the middle of the week because most husbands want to be alone for a while and satisfy themselves by watching adult movies on their computers. Thursday is my day off, preparing for Friday. But Friday is the evening when lonely girls go out with the thought that they will not return home until they either drink themselves into oblivion or pass out in someone's bed. If you approach them before they get too drunk, you can give them a reason to go out next week. But if you drag it out too long, alas, we can only hope that your hand is still sober enough to give you pleasure. As a true corporate person, I never thought to look inside the building where I worked. But one day I had no choice. When the elevator doors opened on my floor, I was taken by surprise. There, in all the beauty of my world, stood one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen. Miss Sandra Williams was stunning. Tall, slender, as if she had descended from cloud number 10. She was so much above my level that I found it difficult to breathe. When I got to my office, the first thing I did was find out about her from my faithful assistant, Sylvia Thompson. Sylvia told me that she is Big Boss's friend, and I should stay away from her. I was a little upset, but decided to accept it. I never missed a chance to stop and chat with her at her workplace. I never walked past without at least saying hello. But out of habit, on Friday night, I went back to my favorite bar in search of the future Mrs. Fuller. Sitting at the counter and looking at my reflection in the mirror above the bar, I scanned the room for perspective. And suddenly I saw the woman from my fantasies. There was only one woman in the world with such mesmerizing features flashing from behind her flowing curls. I assumed that she was here with her husband or boyfriend, a completely logical assumption. I sat alone at the bar and watched as she hung on her friend in a booth on the other side of this small, cozy room. But it wasn't the boss. It was someone I had never seen before. I don't remember what I felt at that moment, but it seemed like a scene from a movie. I downed the rest of my drink, paid, and prepared to leave alone. But as soon as I stood up, I felt a light touch of a hand on my shoulder. "Good evening, Mr. Fuller." The voice was melodic and bewitching. Stunned, I turned around and saw those same wonderful blue eyes looking at me. "You don't have to call me Mr. Fuller when we're not at work." Outside the office, my friends call me Jackson. She nodded in agreement, albeit reluctantly, and before I knew what was happening, I was invited to join her and her friend. At first, I thought it would be rude not to meet her friend, but when I did, he seemed quite open, sociable, pleasant to talk to, and an overall nice guy. So when I was invited to join this couple, I didn't feel like a third wheel. Somewhere during the evening, I went from third wheel to designated driver. My drink changed to water. When the two were ready to go somewhere outside the noisy bar, they were both already pretty drunk. I took their keys and put them in an Uber. First, I took her to the apartment, put her in bed, and took off only her shoes. I won't say that I wasn't tempted to explore that beautiful body, but I didn't. I found his address in my wallet, gave instructions to the driver, and said goodbye. Oh yes, I carefully returned the keys to his pocket. The following Monday, when I walked into the office, I must admit, I couldn't wait to see the look on our blonde receptionist's face. I was even deliberately a little late to catch her. Alas, I was disappointed. When the elevator doors opened, I did not see her at her workplace. She was absent. Instead of going straight to my office, I stopped to inquire about the lovely Sandra. The new person at the reception told me that he didn't know anything. She was only told that Sandra would not come today, and she was temporarily appointed in her place. Having learned from past mistakes, I asked the young girl's name, greeted her with as much respect as possible, and wished her luck. Having completed the exchange of pleasantries, I headed to my office and began to find out what happened to Sandra. I knew full well that I was the same idiot who put her to bed on Friday night. I instructed my assistant Sylvia to find out how she was doing, and about an hour later Sandra herself called me. She thanked me for my help and asked if her condition had become the subject of rumors in the office. When I assured her that there were no rumors and I was not going to spread them, she thanked me again and ended the conversation. Of course, I thought she was worried about her relationship with her boss, but obviously she wasn't. Besides, I didn't even know which boss we were talking about. Sandra returned to work on Tuesday, and during her break, she stopped by my office. I just wanted to thank you for getting me out of that terrible situation that night. From the outside, it seemed like you were in love with this guy, I answered. Oh, he was nice enough, but he had worse brains than a mouse from Manhattan. I think the rats in New York have long since eaten all the mice, I replied. Exactly, she smiled, and when I understood the joke, I smiled too. At that moment, I noticed Sylvia behind Sandra, shaking her head. This was her code signal. Don't do anything stupid. In that moment, I proved that I was just as clueless as that guy from Friday night. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? She responded with a smile, a nod, and the words, just tell me when and where. Sylvia nearly fainted, but I pulled myself together and arranged for dinner on Friday night after work. As soon as Sandra left the office, Sylvia burst through the door. Don't tell me you're on a date with her. Please. Don't worry so much, it's just dinner. I tried to smile and calm her furious gaze. You don't know anything about her. Damn it, Jackson, she's been married more times than both of us combined. Sylvia paused to catch her breath. Looks like you did the research for me. I care about you. If you're having a bad day, I'm having a bad day too. If you continue this date, I'll have to deal with that old Jackson again. You'll be back where we started, when Amy tried to poison you. Wow, let's not forget that she herself was bullied. Why I suddenly started defending my ex was a surprise to me. There wasn't a single corner of my mind where I wanted to deal with her and her cavalcade of boyfriends again. Sylvia was right when she said that a divorced woman turns into a slut. My children, who never left my side, thought that I would try to save her from the succession of men in her bedroom. But the way I saw it, once is too much, and trying to kill the hand that feeds you, well, that's too much. Finally, the work week has come to an end, at least for me. But before I could leave the office, a note from Sylvia appeared on my desk. Be careful. Now this woman and friend who was trying to set me up with one of her friends suddenly started telling me to be careful. Don't do this. You will regret it. You don't know her. I couldn't help but think, what the hell is wrong with her? You cannot understand your own feelings for a man or husband, but at the same time you interfere with my choices. We agreed that I would pick Sandra up at 8, and I had reservations at a nice restaurant on the waterfront. As we sat down at the table, I couldn't help but notice a guy in a tight t-shirt whose muscles were bulging out. He did not take his eyes off the beautiful creature sitting opposite me. I endured this as long as I could, and then asked, "Do you know this guy?" She turned to look at him and said, "Yes, I once knew." "What does it mean?" I asked. "I was married to him." I grinned. "Once upon a time. Does this mean that you got married more than once?" She didn't like it. She frowned. "You know, there was a small chance, a tiny chance that you would have dessert today. But now I'm counting your chances, and they don't look good." Oh God, I thought. Shut up. Just shut up. For the rest of the evening, I was the most interesting man on the planet. I have never used the pronoun I. All I wanted was to know more about Sandra. True, I didn't hear a word she said, but I knew for sure. I was acting like a good boy, just like my mother always said I was. When the waiter asked what we would like for dessert, I felt like I was going to die on the spot. Sandra looked at me and smiled. I looked at the waiter and said, "The lady and I better pack everything with us." We didn't even wait for the cute boxes to come from the kitchen. I held the chair for her as she stood up. My insides clenched in anticipation of having her in my arms. My car was waiting outside, and we went to her apartment. When I said apartment, I was wrong. She lived in a house with a doorman and an elevator that went to the top floor. I know because we got to the top. When she opened the door, I was surprised and a little confused at what I was getting myself into. There was a spotlight mounted above the door, Another one illuminated the living room, and a third showed the way along the short corridor. I could only hope for what awaited me at the end of this corridor. At the restaurant, I took care of my hydration needs, but Sandra excused herself and headed purposefully down the hallway. She knew very well that I was watching every movement of her body as she moved away from me. I chuckled. If I were still with my wife Amy, I would have to work hard to get my manhood on alert. But not with this woman. I ran my hand down the front of my pants and smiled. This lady is going to enjoy herself today. My jacket was nearly thrown over the back of the chair, and I just had time to settle into the chair, enjoying the anticipation of the sight that was about to appear from the corridor. I heard the door click and looked up. Sandra seemed to slip into the room. With one flick of a dial, she changed the lighting from a soft white to a seductive shade of blue. She stopped at the exit of the corridor and stood there like a model or a goddess waiting for approval to enter. But when she crossed the room and came to where I was sitting, all my fantasies became reality. I had previously noticed her thin waist and chest, tightly clad in office clothes. But now nothing was left to my imagination. Everything was open, and I was stunned by her almost naked beauty. Without saying a word, she extended her long, thin fingers towards me and unfastened the clasp that held her breasts. As the bra fell to the floor, she leaned forward, offering me these delicious delights. I thought I was in heaven. The next hour was a combination of exploration and her guiding movements, leading me to the paradise that she wanted to give. But along with this came her fatigue. She finally relinquished control of our fusion, and I was able to take her to new heights. As we lay on what had once been a bed of passion and surrender, we both held on to each other as if unwilling to let go. At least I definitely didn't want to. After a small snack and minimal conversation, it was not difficult for her to bring my attention back to her needs. It was that time on her bed that I truly understood what the expression making love meant. When two bodies merge the way ours merged, they cannot be separated. At least it seemed so to me at that moment. Much later, when we were both struggling with exhaustion, we unexpectedly fell asleep. I always got up early. This day was no exception. I took a shower, trying to shave off the stubble with a razor that looked like it was used on a woman's legs or armpits. It wasn't very pleasant. After pulling on the pants I had been wearing the night before, I found a beach towel and draped it over my shoulders. The light was still blue, so I turned the switch to return the room to normal. I walked out onto the terrace behind the living room, took a sip of coffee, and realized that this world was far beyond my normal standard of living. Don't get me wrong, I achieved significant success in the company where I worked. There was always this unattainable carrot dangling in front of me. But with my age, children, and near-death experience, I came to the conclusion that this carrot can go to hell. I just wanted to be left alone and allowed to live out my life in peace. No fuss, no worry, just leave me alone. From time to time, I still interacted with my children. They tried to say something about their mother, but I always interrupted them. In my opinion, this woman betrayed me, our children, and our marriage. She destroyed my trust in her, my hopes, and the more than 20 years I had devoted to her. After some time, Sandra invited me to move in with her. At first, I was a little wary, but when I realized that I was spending more time in her bed than in mine, I decided to move. Our relationship began as something akin to a honeymoon. There was sex as soon as I walked through the door, and there was sex in other rooms of the apartment. Every night, sex and more sex. This constant need began to erode the thrill of sensation. This went on for about a month and a half. One night, I came home and heard the shower running. Sylvia, my assistant, said that Sandra left for lunch and never returned to the office. I didn't think anything of it until I entered the apartment. Another man was sitting on the sofa and leafing through a magazine. He raised his head from the pages, nodded briefly, and looked down again. The next sound is the click of Sandra's heels on the hardwood floor. She looked at me and nodded towards the man. "This is Tommy from the skating rink. He's inviting me to dinner." She walked past me as if I were a janitor or some unimportant servant. "Come on, Tommy," she commanded. Before I could process what was happening, I heard the doors slam shut and the elevator bell ring. I poured myself a drink, sat down on the sofa, and tried to understand the situation. We're not married, and she never said she loved me, I thought. To be honest, I didn't tell her that either. She was the one who made me feel fulfilled. Or maybe I should say empty. Should we just let her have fun with whoever she wants? After all, she has a really fancy apartment. My mind began to doubt its motives. She constantly talks about her lifestyle. Judging by what's been going on lately, it seems like I'm being made out to be a cuckold, and I just didn't realize it. I took a sip of my drink. What would I do if my ex-wife Amy were in her place? I knocked back the glass, enjoying the burn of the last sip, and set it on the bar counter. Goodbye, Blondie, goodbye. They didn't call me that night. I think she noticed I wasn't there when she got home. 3 people in her bed would be a little cramped. For God's sake, I didn't have to go back to that crummy little motel, but I did. It seemed simply because he knew the way. The next day, when I got off the elevator, Sandra was sitting at her desk and didn't even look up to see if I was still alive. I was so captivated by her beauty that I completely forgot that behind her golden hair and perfect skin was a spoiled, selfish bitch. As soon as I entered my office, my assistant informed me that the boss wanted to see me in his office. Oh damn, I thought. Her boyfriend is going to fire me for being rough with his personal toy. Having climbed to the floor above, where the offices of the big bosses were located, I was sure that I would not have long to work here. I had just sat down when his assistant showed me the door. Words like, "Relax, breathe, it's just work," flashed through my head. At a huge and very impressive table sat a neat, perfectly dressed old man of about 70, at least. "Sir, did you want to see me?" "Well, if you're Jackson Fuller, then yes. I heard you're dating my daughter." Holy saints, she is his daughter. Not a mistress, I thought. "Well, yes, sir, I dated your daughter, but we broke up." Not surprised, young man. He raised his hand in the air. "Don't get me wrong, I go for walks every chance I get. But when it comes to my own daughter, well, my wife and I drew the line." He rose from his chair. "I'll tell you this. Don't mess with my daughter, and I'll make sure you keep your job. Maybe I'll even transfer you here to the big guys." He laughed, and I laughed with him. 3 minutes later, I was finally able to breathe. When I returned to my floor, I noticed that Sandra was not at the table. In her place sat the sweet girl I met a few months ago when Sandra was taking a day off. This time I stopped and introduced myself properly, and she did the same. Her name was Tammy Hall, and it was her first job after graduating. When I got to my office, my smile was ear to ear, but it didn't last long. "Your children are waiting for you." There was a long pause. "Daddy." I was suddenly ridiculed by the only person I considered my friend. Her sarcasm was so obvious that I froze in place, trying to understand why I deserved such an attitude. "Thank you," I answered, and then added, "You'll be glad to know you still have a job, I guess." I turned from my verbal duel with my assistant and saw my adult children sitting in my office. I tried to put on a happy expression and entered, expecting another trivial request for financial assistance for some ridiculous project. My daughter Anna stood up and approached me, pointing a threatening finger in my face. "Shut the hell up," she ordered. Then she began, "How many times in the last 2.5 years has someone tried to tell you about your mom? How many times have we begged you to listen to us? How many times have we given in to your wishes and never mentioned her? Have you ever thought about her? Well, those days are over. Now you're going to hear the whole damn story, whether you like it or not." I was taken by surprise and already guessed who put them up to it. My assistant Sylvia Thompson. I looked in her direction and saw her looking sternly at me. "You will listen, or your son Tommy will shoot you." I turned to see my son's usual impassive expression. "I wouldn't kill you, Dad. I would only wound you in the arm or leg." I noticed his hand in his jacket pocket, but there was no weapon there. He didn't even aim his finger, as if he had a gun. "Cold," I said. Tell me everything about the woman who tried to kill me, hounded me for years, stole my money, fell in love with another man, and planned to escape to another country." With a softer expression on her face, my daughter said, "Yes, Dad, she did it all. She admitted that she did everything you accused her of. But you have never seen her since that day. She spent her first year in a home for, let's say, the mentally ill. She was so torn inside by what she had done that she was monitored for months to make sure she didn't commit suicide. I started to wonder why no one told me about this, but it was my fault. I was the one who insisted that I wasn't interested in anything to do with Amy. I even went so far as to warn everyone that if anyone mentioned my wife or what happened, they would never see or hear from me again. And now it seems my stubbornness has come back to punish me." My daughter continued her lecture. "Tommy and I had to finish our studies online just to be near her. But you need to know, she's okay whether you like it or not. She's working again, going to the gym, taking care of herself. But every time we try to introduce her to someone, she says you wouldn't approve." She paused and looked at me, trying to catch any reaction to her words. But seeing nothing, she continued, "We took her to parties, but only after we told her you might show up. We keep hoping that you'll be there or that she'll meet a nice guy there. But every time she leaves early and says you wouldn't approve." My daughter's words crushed me. Guilt hit me like a heavenly flood. "Oh, Anna, forgive me. I didn't know she perceived things this way. Tell me what I can do, and I will do my best." "Dad, we honestly don't know. We were hoping you had some idea to help her get out of this state." Finally, my overly quiet and introverted son chimed in. "Why don't you just come over for Sunday dinner? Mom always cooks something tasty after Mass, and it looks like we're having a roast this week. Isn't that one of your favorite dishes?" The daughter's serious face gave way to a smile, and it seemed that that was enough. We chatted a little more before we all left after this impromptu family meeting. I gave my assistant a stern look because I knew that she was the one who arranged all this. But in response, she only smiled. I was starting to like my single room with a bath in a cheap motel. I agreed with the staff that I would only use my own sheets. I bought them at the local Kohl's and did my own laundry. So every night I felt safe knowing I was sleeping in my own sheets. But now I have a new problem. On Sunday morning, I planned to wait for the family to return home after Mass. I was going to have lunch with a woman I hadn't seen or spoken to in a couple of years. I felt a familiar feeling in my stomach, a small lump that had been growing for a long time, and in the end exploded, destroying what I thought was an ideal life. I parked on the street to watch my family, the family I had abandoned so long ago, leave the church and head home. When my son drove by, I was surprised to see a young girl next to him. "Oh, my boy has a girlfriend," I thought. "It's nice." I waited for what seemed like enough time and then started the car and headed towards the house where I knew God knew what was going to happen. My daughter opened the door when I walked inside. She started to say that Amy was in the kitchen, but when she saw the expression on my face, she fell silent. My ex-wife Amy was standing in the kitchen. She was wearing the same apron that I gave her the day we moved into this house. The lump in my stomach disappeared, and tears appeared in my eyes. Every moment of my life up to that moment had been meaningless. All the anger and pain I had ever felt towards this woman disappeared as if by magic. I saw only happy moments. How she smeared wedding cake on my nose at our wedding. How we took the children to the mountains, to the ocean, to the circus for the first time. All the happy memories came flooding back to me, washing away the pain and suffering. Before I entered this house, I was afraid that my anger would take over and ruin more lives. But now I was forced to see all the pain and suffering I had caused. Not Amy, but me. How I denied Amy her right to be heard. How I refused to let the evidence speak for itself. "You'll stay for dinner, Dad?" the daughter insistently asked. I didn't hear a word. I walked past my daughter. When I entered the kitchen, Amy dropped what she was holding. "Jax," was the only thing she said. Silence reigned in the room, broken only by sobs and words. "I'm sorry, I love you. I didn't want to let this woman out of my arms." It took a long time before things calmed down. Amy and I felt like high school students again. While the children cleared the table, we went out onto the terrace and talked for a long time. We both kept saying, "I'm sorry," but it didn't mean anything. The most important thing we agreed on was that we were both fools. We could have put an end to all this chaos months ago. "But then it wouldn't be so fun," Amy smiled. "You're crazy, but I still love you," I replied. As we walked back into the house, we saw questions written on our children's faces. "Tommy, do you mind if I start dating your mother?" The sigh of relief was deafening. Everyone hugged each other. My daughter jumped up and down with happiness. Amy elbowed me in the side and whispered, "You asked the wrong question." I smiled, recovering from embarrassment. "I mean, would you mind if I slept with your mother?" Everyone laughed, and that's when I recognized the girl who was hugging my son. It was Tammy Hall, the new secretary who had replaced Sandra Williams, my boss's daughter. And subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.